I think, again, it's just sort of don't get too high with the highs and don't get too low with the lows. You know, you're going to go through moments of great growth and it's so exciting and you're conquering the world. And then there are moments where it's like it's tougher and it's a grind and the team aren't that happy and your investors aren't that happy, and it can change so fast.
Trials, tribulations, mistakes, barriers, successes and failures. Hear it here firsthand from those that have grown billion-dollar businesses to those that are just starting out. Winner of the Campaign Publishing Award for Best Business Podcast in the UK, Success is in the Mind is the only place where you can get a sense of business reality in a world full of idealism. Everyone claims to be an entrepreneur, but can everyone live up to the title? What does it take to start a business, to get your product into a high street store or grow a well-managed team? I'm Oliver Bruce, founder and entrepreneur myself. Join me as I interview business leaders and founders from across the globe, delving into what makes them tick, their differentiators and intrinsic motivators. This is Success is in the Mind. Thank you so much to our headline sponsors for the year, Capsule Cover. Capsule Cover, a specialist insurance partner to growth businesses, supports some of the UK's most innovative and ambitious companies. Sponsoring each and every one of our podcasts, we're on a journey with Capsule, and so should you be. If you're a scale-up or an ambitious, high-growth business, check out how Capsule Cover can help you with bespoke insurance solutions. Inquire via capsulecover.com and quote Success22. Freddy Ward is co-founder of Wild Cosmetics, a direct-to-consumer subscription deodorant company with a heavy focus on natural ingredients and cutting down on plastic waste by supplying refillable deodorants. Having just closed a £2 million funding round, Wild are disrupting an industry that, to date, giants like Shaw and Gillette have owned. Before Freddy's entrepreneurial life, he started out as the fifth employee at HelloFresh back in 2012. Freddy worked his way up to director of marketing before he decided to start his own company called Wild with a lifelong friend. Wild already has a loyal following of over 100,000 customers, selling over 300,000 deodorants in their first 18 months. In this episode of Success is in the Mind, I asked Freddy about his time at HelloFresh, the pros and cons of crowdfunding your business, and the experience of building a brand with a close friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Freddy Ward. Freddie, you studied a master's degree in history at the University of Edinburgh, but your entire life has kind of revolved around marketing and looking into the future. How helpful was that history degree in hindsight?
Good question. I think obviously university was just a good time to sort of grow up and learn to be a bit more independent and kind of take responsibility for kind of working towards something. Definitely some transferable skills into kind of entrepreneurship and starting businesses. And then with history, you know, there's quite a lot of writing, quite a lot of, I suppose, analyzing stuff that then, you know, does become relevant when you're looking at kind of marketing, but probably relatively tenuous links and, you know, very generalist education, I suppose, kind of veered into a different route as I kind of left university and went into my first kind of proper job.
So what were you like at school before you went to university? Were you quite an academic child?
No, I'm dyslexic. I wasn't bottom of the bottom, but I definitely wasn't particularly academic, sort of ground out some reasonable grades in the end, but definitely didn't come naturally to me kind of studying and working. So yeah, I would definitely not class myself in the kind of academic group.
You say you're dyslexic. When did you realise that you were dyslexic? Was it because your parents put you through different courses to understand that? Or was it just by luck that your teachers told you?
I think there were kind of a few telltale signs when I was kind of, I suppose, late, sort of 10 plus, around that kind of age. You know, things like struggling to tie my shoelaces, not able to do a tie and bits and pieces like that. And then got a bit of help and, you know, was really well supported and it hasn't held me back. And, you know, when you kind of understand dyslexia a bit more, there are a lot of kind of upsides and a lot of traits that I think link quite nicely to entrepreneurship. Definitely don't see it as something that's held me back or something that I'm, you know, worry about at all.
I mean, a lot of successful entrepreneurs, Richard Branson for one, is dyslexic. I'm dyslexic myself. In terms of, you say that there's positive attributes that you can associate to dyslexia. What are they?
I think as kind of an emotional intelligence, you know, I think you tend to over-index on being good with people, but maybe not being good with writing or analyzing stuff or whatever. And I think, you know, people is where business starts. And if you can be good with people and you can connect with people, whether that's your employees, your investors, your customers. For me, that's been critical. That's kind of where I tend to focus on a strength of mine versus some of the more technical stuff that I would, in a business like Warders now, try and hire for some of those areas that I'm not as strong in.
And we'll get on to that later. But when you graduated university, you went into Firefly Tonics, which is a great brand in and of itself. Now, you did sales within that role, which again is a people-orientated role. Was that because you realised that you were quite good with people after graduating from uni because of the dyslexia, or was that because you didn't know what you wanted to do?
I think ultimately I failed to get into any graduate scheme, is the reality of it. I think I always got stuck at the first kind of barrier of all these tests and psychometric tests and things. And just, I don't think I got one single interview, and I applied to all the kind of Unilevers, Mars, etc., whatever. So I was like, well, I'm going to have to take a slightly different approach to this, and was kind of quite interested in the food scene at the time, and started to sort of look into startups, and was like, well, this sounds fun, and maybe it's easier to get into a startup than it is into a larger company. So that the Firefly, my first role was not very glamorous. I would fill a rucksack full of cold drinks and ice packs, and I'd trudge around London, going to shops and cafes, trying to persuade them to buy this new range that they'd bought out. And it turned out that range was a total flop. But it was, it's a great experience. You kind of, you're learning how to talk to people, and you kind of, they had a really nice office in the middle of like Bishop's Park, just really fun, friendly people. And I was like, well, maybe Firefly hasn't quite worked out, but I definitely think startups feel a lot more fun and welcoming than larger companies. So that's kind of where I started to focus.
And you went into quite the startup, which actually has become quite the monster, even though they've only just started to turn over a profit. But HelloFresh, you were the 5th employee when you joined as a sales rep at that point as well. Why did you get into HelloFresh? It was a bit of a change of tack there.
Again, sort of food and drink, I suppose, is quite a similar world. And I was looking to leverage the experience I had at Firefly into a startup. And, recipe boxes were just beginning to start. I mean, no one thought they were a particularly good idea. And I wasn't too convinced myself, but I thought, look, this sounds really fun. Yeah, again, I always say this, but startups have very little budget to hire. So if you do manage to find the role tucked away somewhere, you've got a very good chance, because I think for that role at HelloFresh, 5 people applied. 2 of them dropped out.
Wow.
1 wasn't suitable. So, I mean, basically they had to hire me if they wanted to hire someone.
Which is more than Unilever did when you went for those application processes and they said no to you. But in terms of actually finding a startup and taking that risk, because that in and of itself is quite a risky move, because there is no track record. They haven't had, really any growth. And you go in there as the 5th employee because frankly they had no other option but to hire you. It could have gone wrong there and then, and you could have lost that job as well. Are you acutely aware that you are quite a risky guy?
I think there's a lot of luck in life. Already I see myself as just you got lucky, and you learn a lot from those experiences. I think my big feeling now is that the risk early on in your career is not that massive, really, because you're just starting out. You're figuring things out. Even if you go somewhere really safe, like, I don't know, an investment bank or insurance or whatever, you may well get 6 months in and realize you don't enjoy it. It's much better to, go somewhere that you can feel passionate about the product, and you feel excited to kind of get up in the morning, and you kind of get learning. And as I said, it was just pure luck from my side that I stumbled on a business and an idea that had legs and had a good team that could execute it.
And they're sort of renowned for being one of the world's most ruthless food startup employers. Now, what was it like when you started there? Was it quite cutthroat? Was it quite aggressive, or is that sort of fake news?
I think that's fake news, to be honest with you. I mean, definitely they're incredibly ambitious, and building a $10 billion business in 10 years is phenomenally difficult. And the guys at the top are just incredible operators. And I think it's impossible to keep everyone happy. I think the same, you look at Brewdog in the press, who've been taking a lot of slack for employees and people being unhappy. But the reality is, you're hiring when you're growing at that speed, and you're in such competitive cutthroat markets. You're hiring lots of people, you make lots of mistakes. And the most important thing is you've got to learn fast, move on, and kind of keep evolving. Otherwise you die. And I think often what's not reflected is there's a lot of employees in this businesses that have incredible opportunities and amazing support. I think what HelloFresh were really good at. My CEO in the UK was younger than me, so I think he was 22, and I was 24. They gave us a huge amount of ability to go and make it happen, and to step up at every stage. And if we weren't capable of stepping up, they would hire someone else in to do that. But we were always given the opportunity to give that. And yeah, you work hard, but ultimately it wasn't crazy. I definitely wasn't working like a Goldman Sachs or kind of legal firm, and I enjoyed it. I absolutely loved it. I loved going to events at the weekends and talking to customers and things going wrong in the office. I mean, I think food delivery is one of the hardest businesses in the world, because you've got stuff live in your supply chain 24 hours a day, and this stuff is going off, this stuff is kind of not turning up, and for your customers, like, if I don't deliver a deodorant a day late, then it's all right, you might smell for a day, but you're not going to be. But if you if you don't deliver food and people don't have their dinner, they are really not very happy. So there's a huge amount of pressure, but also combined with the need of, like, the businesses don't work as small companies. So the only way recipe boxes work is if you get them to a very large scale pretty quickly. So that there just has to be this focus of, we've got to grow, otherwise we can't get the leverage in the supply chain to make the fundamentals work for our customers. And there were some hairy moments along the way, but now they've been incredibly successful. May I say, far more successful after I left. I think they've 10x their value in the stock market. I hope that's not completely connected.
No, not at all. I mean, getting it off the ground is one of the hardest things. Once it's off the ground, it's not plain sailing, but it's a little bit easier because you have a track record. You and your team were traipsing through London, handing over millions and millions of flyers to punters as they walked by. This was sort of pre-social media, pre-influencer marketing. Flyers were one way of marketing and starting a business. Did it work, or was that sort of, a lot of time for not much reward?
What we were at HelloFresh is incredibly data-driven. So we were only investing our time in things that we knew were going to work and grow the business. And social media did exist at that time. It was hard and not as easy to scale and not as understood. A lot of companies were doing big tube adverts at the time, but we didn't really feel we could afford that. Or certainly the problem with tube adverts is you need to spend 30,000, 40,000 pounds of investment to kind of test it. But the whole tube thing actually happened by accident. So we got sent back a whole load of flyers from a partner that didn't want them or had let us down. And we were struggling to hit those, like, we had one day left in the month. I think we needed, something like 50 customers to sort of deliver our goal. And we were like, okay, well, Friday afternoon, let's all just go and hand out these flyers at the tube station. Kind of a bit of a joke, did some filming around it, bit of a kind of team bonding exercise. And then we came in on Monday morning and, everything's tracked, all the data, and we looked at the numbers like, oh, wow, that's actually slightly more successful than we thought it was going to be. We kind of built an offline version of Facebook. So we had every station in London in an Excel spreadsheet. We would do 3 shifts in the day. So we'd do a morning, lunchtime, evening shift, and we'd be doing hundreds of shifts a week. And we would track how many flyers you hand out per hour, what your conversion rate was in every location, in every person, all the different creative variants. So it's kind of like a lot of what Facebook does, but doing that in an offline world. Yeah, it was incredible while it lasted. I think you wouldn't get away with it from a sustainability perspective. No. It was pretty rustic. We would get in at 7 o'clock in the morning. We'd fill up these cricket bags with flyer parcels. We nearly got kicked out of our building. We had a bomb squad threat. So the police bomb squad came up to our office because someone had left one of our boxes next to a bin. It was a bit of a crazy time. And again, we didn't pay for any licenses or anything like that. So we were kind of certainly pushing our luck in certain areas. You kind of grind it out and you work. And as I said, I think we did over sort of 10 million flyers over a kind of 18-month period. And it was an absolutely massive growth channel. The London Underground was the single most concentrated area of high quality customers that you have in the UK. You've got, you're basically indexing for people who are, working in London, they're busy, time poor. So it was absolutely the perfect targeting for us. If you're looking at just pure performance metrics, there was absolutely no comparison. The flyering was 10x more effective than putting a big billboard up or a tube car panel up.
And you worked your way up to the top of the chain, really, in terms of marketing, with the job title Director of Marketing. But then you decided to throw it all away, jump ship, and start your own business. Why did you do that?
I think it was an amazing experience. 6 years. I probably wasn't the right person to go to the next kind of level. So it just felt like the right time. That the business had IPO'd. There was a bit of kind of change going on. They were sort of, it was a very, very big business at that time. And a lot of it was like calls with very senior people in a centralized location. And it wasn't set up for people like me who just like to try and make things happen and not get sign off and ask for an apology later. It has to become bigger and more structured and more process driven and more hierarchical. And I think at that stage it was sort of like, wow, I've learned so much. I've absolutely loved this, but it's time for a change, and time while I've still got the energy and the enthusiasm to go and try and have a go with something myself.
So you decided to leave, obviously. You came up with this brilliant idea, which I'm amazed hasn't been done before, which is essentially refillable, recyclable deodorant, right? It's really innovative. The packaging looks incredible online. Can you remember when you came up with that idea? Because it's similar in terms of subscription model to HelloFresh, but a totally different product.
Yeah, so it's myself and my co-founder, Charlie. We've both been kind of working in the D2C sort of space. I got some advice actually from someone who said, look, if you're going to start a business, try and leverage some of the skills that you've learned in your previous role, so you have some sort of strategic advantage when you're kind of going into it. So, I'd understood a lot about the dynamics of subscription and how that works and some of the challenges. So, really wanted to find something that could have a subscription element to it. And then I think it was, really obvious that sustainability was the kind of forefront of change and where a lot of the action was happening and where the dynamics of being a startup really play into your hands, because a lot of large companies are struggling with legacy supply chains, cost bases, and authenticity challenges. Some of them are doing great work, but the consumers are like, well, I'm not sure they want it from that brand or they kind of trust it. So I kind of felt like, look, the world was going to go through a massive transformation in the next 3 to 5 years. That was going to be focused around sustainable and purpose-driven brands, helping to take more conscious consumerism into the mainstream. And originally we actually looked at trying to do an ethical fashion marketplace. But then we realized that we really knew nothing about fashion and we were miles out of our depth. So we quickly rode back and kind of focused on the bathroom. I think, again, there were a few brands doing kitchen refillables and sustainable stuff in the kitchen. And we were kind of like, well, no one's doing anything in the bathroom. And the bathroom's one of the areas where you have the biggest problem, where there's loads and loads of plastic and very little of it's recycled, because you just throw it all into the bin at the end of the week and that all just goes into the kind of rubbish. So I think on a kind of macro level, it's like there's a huge opportunity here to rethink how we use and think of bathroom products.
And in terms of the team that you have roughly 40 staff in the business. Obviously, you had a team at HelloFresh, which you'd have to manage and delegate to. Now, a lot of entrepreneurs, go into business having never had a team around them, having never worked for anybody. Did that help working for HelloFresh and managing a team when actually trying to grow one organically yourself?
HelloFresh allowed me to make a lot of mistakes. There's one thing I learned there, like hiring is so important. It's not an intuition thing. I just thought like, well, I kind of know what a nice person is, and I know if someone's hungry, and I'm going to ask them a few random questions, and then if they fit my kind of criteria that I haven't really thought about, then I'm going to hire them and we'll just go for it and see what happens. And then as we grew, it was like, well, what we need is experience. We just need to like hire experienced people. Let's bring them in. They'll know more than us and we'll learn from them, and we'll just hire because they've been at this great company. And, those in hindsight were very bad, naive decisions and painful ones that we often had to kind of go back on. So I think try to be a lot more structured and thoughtful with interviewing and hiring. And and set expectations. It's working at Wild is really hard. We're asking a lot from you. We're a small team trying to make big change. So it's impossible to fully get that across to people, but we really try and set expectations that this is, not for everyone. It's a hard working environment, but it's really rewarding if this type of environment is somewhere that you can enjoy. And we're trying to do something positive. We're trying to create change, and we're certainly excited and passionate about it, and we try and find other people who can galvanize us. And been incredibly lucky with our team so far. That it's always central to success, but really has been super key to where we've got to so far.
And you look at the market. When you started, you said it was 3 million quid. What's the market valuation now then?
I think Wild has got quite a nice percentage of that market.
I was going to say.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely probably close to 10x where it was.
And what sort of market share, because you must have owned the whole market within a couple of months, really, quite frankly. What sort of percentage of that market do you own now as a business?
I think Wild is definitely sort of 80% of the market at the moment.
Wow, okay. So what sort of revenue are you guys turning over?
So eight-figure revenue in this year. So, we're on the right track, and growing pretty quickly.
Because in 2020, you launched a Kickstarter campaign for 5,000 quid. You raised 12,609 quid, which with 454 backers, that is a small amount of money to start a brand, start a business like this. I know you've recently gone through a much larger fund for 2 million quid, but what can you do with 12.5 grand when you're starting a business?
You can buy some stock and validate what you're doing and kind of get off the ground. I mean, I think that was actually a failure for us. We wanted to do a lot more, and it was a learning experience. Again, at that stage, the product was just a natural deodorant. It wasn't very innovative. We were kind of trying to say to the crowd, "Well, fund us, and then we'll do the innovative packaging." But they were like, "Well, we don't really see that vision." So a lot of that Kickstarter was probably people being kind to us, family and friends being like, "Oh, these stupid idiots," but they're hounding us, so we got to buy them. A few new people. So I think that was probably one of the first, not total failures, but it definitely wasn't defined as a success, and bought us a bit of stock, but ultimately wasn't enough to really get the business going. So we had to go and raise some external capital, kind of after that. And I think really for something like Kickstarter to work, you have to be able to capture the imagination of those customers, and a lot of it is about the design and the innovation. And we had that, and we were working on it, but we didn't want to share it or put it out there. So it was kind of a bit of a weird stage, and we probably got our timings kind of a bit wrong in our haste to kind of get something up and running. But what we were able to do is send that out, and actually, we were far more successful when we came off Kickstarter and started in our own universe. And we validated that, look, natural deodorant is a thing. It can exist as a category, and the unit economics can kind of work. And once we knew that, we were like, okay, well, let's run with this and go bigger.
And in terms of the reason you wanted to initially raise £5,000, what was the logic behind that? Because, yes, you overraised, and that's great. Yes, it might not have been enough money, but why go in initially with a £5,000 sort of pre-seed?
So we put a bit of our own money in. As I said, I think ultimately, if you can avoid dilution and not take on external capital, gives you a lot of freedom and a lot of room to deliver things. We knew that it was possible to do that. And I think when I look back, if we'd executed really well, we may well have been able to bootstrap the business. And I also think at that stage, lots of money doesn't really help you, because you don't need lots of money. You just need to stay scrappy. You need to kind of learn, and you need to validate. That's what we got from it. We validated a lot of assumptions. We got a lot of feedback. We realized that we weren't very good at making natural deodorant at that point, and we needed to make tons of things better. But there was like enough there to be like, you know what? We put ourselves out there. We've put this idea out there. It's not wholly stupid, and it's probably worth like committing the next 12, 18 months of our life to see whether we can get to the next stage.
Interestingly, Freddie, people often say never to go into business with friends or family. So why go into business with Charlie? Why go into business with a mate?
It's a good question. I suppose I much prefer to go into business with someone I know really well than someone I don't know really well. We were really clear. We set things out at the start. We realized, we'd had mates who'd gone into business together and it had not gone well. So we'd kind of seen that, and we sort of talked through that experience, and that had been quite divisive within our friendship group. So we tried to make it really clear at the start, okay, if this happens, this will happen. If it doesn't work, we walk away and we try and remain friends. And we realize that you probably, there'll be some problems, but you kind of worth the risk. And it's, for me, again, I don't think I could be a solo founder. I have huge admiration for people who do it by themselves, but the mental load and the pressure I would find phenomenally hard if it was just me. And it's been the best decision, to found with someone. And, as we've grown, we realize we complement the skill sets quite nicely and seems to work quite effectively. Although what's interesting is there's just very different challenges as the business grows, and what skills and relationship you need when you're going to get starting to what you now need, when we're trying to go, for the next phase of growth, are slightly different, and the dynamics change and the pressures change. And so you're constantly reevaluating, but definitely, for me, it's been a great thing. And we kind of have learned to work really well together, and we have fun, which is, I think if we have fun, then the team should have fun. And so I think that's really important.
And in terms of drawbacks with working with a friend, I suppose, have there been any sort of disasters, negative elements, things around that relationship which actually have tarnished it slightly?
No, I don't think so. I think, I'm quite an intense character. I tend to overreact to things, feel the pressure a lot, can be slightly hot-headed, and then Charlie's very calm, very level-headed, very self-confident, but that it just kind of works, and the dynamic works. And we've definitely had some, like every startup, you have moments of like, maybe we won't make it to next week, or maybe this is going to kill us, or whether that's production or brand damage, or cash flow issues, or kind of whatever. And I think also I would say is that, again, HelloFresh is phenomenally good training for that pressure. I'd been working at quite a high level and under a lot of pressure to deliver results over a period of time. And as I said, with food, things are going wrong all the time, and big problems. So you kind of, again, in my early years at HelloFresh, I used to really, really care. And I suppose, if I thought deeply about it, I probably would say that, probably wasn't the healthiest for my mental health. But over time, you learn to become a bit more thick-skinned about it. You learn not to overreact, and ultimately, we're quite clear that we can do the best we can do. We're going to give it every shot. Maybe it'd be a bit embarrassing if we fail, but ultimately, life goes on, and there are bigger things out there than a company, and we should have fun. If we're not having fun doing it, then what's the point?
And in terms of the manufacturing side of it, when coming up with, I suppose, that natural deodorant, who and where did you go to get that manufactured? Because that must have been quite a difficult initial journey.
Yeah, I mean, again, particularly because in the UK, there's not many people who manufacture it, because it's not a very big category, and none of them were really that interested, because again, they're like, this is a tiny category. There's no, it's never going to be a thing. We had some, really unfortunate experience where we found a great manufacturer, we found a great partner, we worked with them for 5 months, developing the formulation, tweaking it, testing it, all these things, and then went to a big meeting. They had like 20 people in the room. I was like, wow, this is crazy, 20 people for our little startup. And they called us the next day and said, we've pulled the project. We don't think it's the right opportunity for us. It's really not easy in that stage to find a new manufacturer, basically start again with your products, and there's very rigorous testing in the UK on cosmetics. So you kind of need to go back to the start. So it was definitely a real challenge. We used some contacts and networks to kind of advise us and help us. And, along the way, we found some great people, and we've kind of been able to, use the great thing for us, as I said, is I think we're on our 7th iteration of our deodorant since we launched. So we're able to give really clear customer feedback. This is what they don't like. This is why people are, not happy with Wild. How can we go through that, make it better, test it with our community, and then kind of roll it out. So that's been really, really core to our success. And, we continue today to, we're always challenging ourselves. How can we make this better and get more people using natural DOs?
Well, you must be doing something right, because to date you've had over 100,000 customers. You've sold over 300,000 deodorants. Those are big numbers. You've only been going sort of 24 months or so. Now, there must have been some issues, some disasters around the manufacturing of those 300,000 units over the last 24 months. Talk to me about those.
I think we're actually nearly at an anniversary of one of our greatest disasters, where we had this huge launch planned. Might even have been this day last year, and we're in lockdown, so you can't go to any of your manufacturers or your third parties. But they have to send us a small batch to make sure it's all right. And we were switching to a new supplier, so we'd outgrown our initial supplier, and we were switching to a new professionalized supplier, and we thought, okay, we've done quite a lot of testing, it'll be all right. We had this big launch planned. 20,000 deodorants turned up, and they were all mushy, just complete kind of liquid. And I just remember calling Charlie going, you're not going to believe this, but they're just like completely unusable. There's no way we can kind of do this. Again, you just go into sort of, you've got to solve the problem mode. Like, how can we get around this? So we had to go back to our old supplier. We had to, beg them to throw other people off the line. We had to, go and source ingredients by reaching out to people on social channels, etc. Just do whatever we can. And we kind of, we made it through in the end, but it was pretty bad. And what you realize is the reason why a lot of large companies stopped creating natural products is because they don't behave in a way that is suitable for large scale manufacturing.
Right.
They're incredibly temperamental. They can do things that you're not expecting. And if you combine that with trying to put it in packaging that people told you you'd never be able to do, it's just complex. But ultimately, that's when you're pushing the boundaries. It's kind of, if it's hard, and I know all the people who are now launching natural deodorants, they're going to run into the same challenges. It's like, it's hard and it's difficult and it's not an exact science. And, we're working with really good people on it, but there are, always challenges in our supply chain. And that's the downside, but also the upside of when you actually do figure these things out and you learn and you don't die from your mistakes, you become, more defensible versus, competitors who are a bit behind you.
And you mentioned earlier about the 20,000 cans that were mushy within the business, and that was a genuine disaster. But has there been anything that you've kind of thought would be insurmountable, but actually managed to get over because it wasn't that bad?
I mean, COVID was pretty scary. So we kind of relaunched the business in April, and the world was shutting down. And,
yes.
There were moments where it was like the warehouse is going to shut down because they're not allowed to, are they key workers? Supply chains were closing, things have gone wrong. So, and I think, again, that was just like, we were 4 of us in an office, and we were probably lean enough and agile enough to like work through it, figure it out, and get to the next phase. So yeah, just like there always feels like there's some icebergs out there. And so far we've been able to swerve left or right and keep ourselves on track. But I said to the team, it's like startups are like computer games, that you kind of go and you get through the first few levels and you're like really pleased with yourself. And then, from time to time, you're going through the computer game and you get stuck on a certain level and you just can't complete it. And it begins to like get into your head and wear you down. And you're like, maybe you should just throw in and start another game. And that's kind of where you find out what you're really made of and what the team are really made of and how up for it you kind of are. So that's the kind of mentality we have. And growing really fast doesn't mean that it gets a lot easier. It often means the opposite.
In terms of when you started, what do you wish you'd kind of known back in the day when you started, well, that actually today is just common knowledge to you?
That's a good question. I think do your research and due diligence early on. Don't be scared to ask for help. Don't try and do everything yourselves. If you're not an expert in an area, go and find an expert and learn from them and use them to kind of deliver that, whether that's in finance, whether that's in production. I think could have avoided a lot of mistakes if I'd reached out to people or got help, in certain things earlier. Don't get too high with the highs and don't get too low with the lows. You're going to go through moments of great growth and it's so exciting and you're conquering the world. And then there are moments where it's like, it's tougher and it's a grind and the team aren't that happy and your investors aren't that happy. And it can change so fast both ways. And I think, try and stay level headed and calm. And, obviously you want to drive the performance and week to week, month to month, day to day. And that urgency is really important. But ultimately, what I need to care about more and more is like, where are we going to be in 5 and 10 years time? And are we making the right general decisions? Are we hiring the right people? Are we creating the right culture? Are we looking after our customers enough to build a business that deserves to be around there and that people want to buy from?
And when things get tough and you sort of, you say you're hot-headed, you throw your toys out the pram, you get angry sometimes, and I totally get that, and Charlie may calm you down, but when things do get tough, how do you kick yourself on, motivate yourself and get out of bed in the morning?
I'm a very just very competitive person. I don't like disappointing people. I don't like people letting people down. And we've got employees, we've got customers. I've got a family now, so you got plenty of motivation to go and make it happen. And ultimately, I love what we do. We're trying to do something good. We're trying to do something positive. We don't always get it right, but we, as long as we're giving it our best shot. And I also think, I also saw Ward as like the worst thing that can happen is that I learn a lot about myself, and I learn a lot more about like actually running a business and being the person making the big decisions. And I still think that today, as long as I'm learning and growing, even if that's from big mistakes and big errors, then that's only a positive thing. It's only, if you take a long-term view, that's only going to help you achieve more of what you want to in your life, even if there are setbacks along the way.
In terms of what you've learned about yourself, Freddie, over the last couple of years whilst running Wild, what have you personally learned about yourself?
I think I learn what I enjoy, that I enjoy people. I enjoy building relationships. That's fundamentally what I'm good at. And then, as I said, it's just I'm learning about trying to become a little less hot-headed, trying to become a little less caught up in the moment. And you become, whether you like it or not, you set the example now to the employees, and they're going to follow you. And so you have to really think about that and think about the tone you're setting, the way you interact with them, the way you set their goals. So just trying to think a lot more about those kind of things as we go look to the next phase of growth for Wild. But I also, I've learned that startups is what I love. I love the autonomy of being able to make the decisions and ultimately, the responsibility and accountability that comes with that. And I can now see myself doing anything else.
Have you ever made a decision that you kind of regret making?
Yeah, I've made lots of decisions I regret making. Nothing is set in stone, and nothing can't be overturned. And again, the biggest learning for me is like understanding when you've made the wrong decision and not being too proud or too selfish to admit that, whether that's to your team or to yourself or to your kind of family and running it. So I actually became a dad.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. In the same couple of months that we sort of started Ward. So it's like a big, quite a lot of life change moments and quite a lot of challenging trade-offs between Ward and family life, and those frictions still exist today, and certainly really challenging trying to be a good dad and trying to be a good CEO, and I'm often neither, but I'm always kind of trying to work my way through it and learn how to do both and be good at both. And I think again, ultimately, having a happy family and kind of supporting that unit, is still more important. Wild is not growth at all costs from my perspective. A solid home life and being around for my son and wife, and hopefully that stability then actually plays into to helping me grow Wild and be a good manager in that front as well.
Truly inspiring and genuinely commendable. But in terms of looking at startups, you love startups, I love startups. For people that are listening to this that are wanting to go into the world of startup or entrepreneurialism, what piece of advice would you give them? So
the best thing I did getting into startups was I had an amazing boss who I learned a huge amount from. And so think if you're going to go into startups and you don't want to start your one initially, and you're thinking like what company I should join, it couldn't matter what vertical it is in, what product it's in. What you need to really find is like who are the great founders out there, and how can I go and work from them and learn from them. And likewise, there are a lot of great ideas out there, wonderful companies with terrible founders who haven't created good cultures or haven't great place to work, and you see people just really being held back in those companies, and sort of knocking them back on their confidence and their career journey. So I think people find the right people, not the right business. And if you find the right people, that will help guide you to wherever you want to go. That will open more doors than you can ever imagine. So that's my first kind of bit of advice. And then secondly, if you want to kind of start your own business, I'd say try and find a low risk way to validate it. Just try and do something where on a relatively small budget, after 6 months, you can say, you know what, this is going to be worth committing the next few years of my life to, or actually it's not quite the right time, or I'm not quite the right kind of person. So I think my view on this is you don't need to go all in on day one, and you should definitely make the leap, but the leap isn't as big as a lot of people build it up to be. It might be a bit embarrassing, and you might, all you can do is learn a bit about yourself and a bit about whether you actually want to do entrepreneurialism. I think the slight challenge comes when you fully commit, you raise money and it's all exciting, and then you kind of get a year in and you realize, oh, maybe this isn't the right category, or maybe I don't have the right skills. And I think that's when that's the only time when people maybe think twice about being that founder.
There are two excellent points there. And in terms of if I wanted to buy your product, or indeed anyone listening wanted to buy your product, Freddy, where can I go to find Wild?
Yeah, so just to reiterate, Wild's mission is to remove single-use plastic and unnecessary chemicals from your everyday bathroom routines. We have a great refillable natural deodorant available now at wearewild.com. So you get an aluminium case and then biodegradable refills that you can compost at home, biodegrades within 6 months. What you can be really sure is that they're never ending up in an ocean or a plastic patch or anywhere like that. And deodorant is just the start for Wild. We have big plans and big ambitions, so keep an eye out, and hopefully some exciting stuff to come in 2022 and beyond.
And Freddy, before you go, what does success look like to you?
It's, as I said to you, success for me is not just about business. I'm not Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, or I'm not an at all costs business guy. It's about having balanced life between family and work, and finding that work fulfilling, and having a team that's growing and excited and developing and solving problems. That's kind of what we want to achieve, and hopefully we build Wild into something meaningful. And I think meaningful, to be a meaningful business, you need millions of customers to be able to do that. So that's kind of definitely our ambition as we look to the future.
Can't wait to keep watching, and good luck with getting those millions of customers, Freddy. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much to our headline sponsors for the year, Capsule Cover. Capsule Cover, a specialist insurance partner to growth businesses, supports some of the UK's most innovative and ambitious companies. Sponsoring each and every one of our podcasts, we're on a journey with Capsule, and so should you be. If you're a scale-up or an ambitious, high-growth business, check out how Capsule Cover can help you with bespoke insurance solutions. Inquire via capsulecover.com and quote Success22. See you next week, 8 a.m. on all podcast platforms. Simply subscribe or ask your smart speaker to play Success is in the Mind podcast. This is a Pinpoint Media podcast presented by me, Oliver Bruce, produced by Dan Miller and Fergus Bruce, edited and designed by Harry Fox and Victoria Bramwell, filmed by Madeline Harris, marketed by Ellie Hanwell and Rachel Buchanan Hughes, and managed by Bethan Wyatt and Annabelle Lawton-Smith. Quite a team. Thanks, guys. If you know anyone you think we should interview, if you want to tell your story or have your say, please reach out to me directly via podcast@pinpoint-media.co.uk. Remember, there's never a good time to start a business, but in business, you should always have a good time. Cheers, guys.